Good afternoon and welcome to Good Works. My name is Chris Kerr with the Ignatian Solidarity Network, and we're glad to have you with us today. For over 15 years, the Ignatian Solidarity Network has been uniting the Ignatian family, meaning the Jesuit network, as well as those who are inspired to work for justice through faith-based social justice formation, education, and advocacy. If you haven't already, please check out our website, ignatiansolidarity.net, and like and follow us on social media to get the latest advocacy alerts, educational resources, and much more. Good Works, responding to COVID-19, features partners from the Ignatian family working diligently to support the needs of community members through direct service, accompaniment, and advocacy in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining us today are Raquel Roman, Cynthia Sanchez, and Jesuit Father Brendan Bussey from the Guadalupe Homeless Project at Proyecto Pastoral at Dolores Mission, the Jesuit parish in the Boyle Heights section of Los Angeles, California. The Guadalupe Homeless Project provides breakfast, dinner, and nightly shelter to 45 men and 15 senior-aged women. The men's shelter is located at Dolores Mission Church and has been operating since 1988. The women's shelter opened in 2014 to respond to the increase of women facing homelessness. The project also manages Proyecto Pastoral's distribution center, which provides low-cost, gently used clothing to local residents and free clothing to residents at the shelter. So we're excited to say welcome to Raquel and Cynthia and Father Brendan. We're glad to have you with us today. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us. I know that Father Brendan has stepped away, but he'll hopefully be joining us soon. Raquel, why don't we start with you? Can you give us a little sense of the past couple months? Tell us about the work of the Guadalupe Project prior to this pandemic beginning and really impacting life in the Los Angeles area, and then walk us through the ways that you've responded as a social ministry to what's happening.
Sure. First, I want to say thank you, Chris, and to the Ignatian Solidarity Network for having us on. I would say in the last few months that we've been responding to COVID-19, one of the things that's really stood out for me is that we were already responding to a crisis. We were working with men and women that were already facing crisis because they were unhoused. We are an emergency shelter that provides housing for from anywhere from 30 to 90 days. But all of that has changed dramatically during COVID. When the Safer at Home order started, we realized that we were not going to be transitioning people out of the shelter, and that we were going to help them stay safe here at the shelter because this was their home. Prior to that, we were constantly working on reaching some of our outcomes that were to house, to help individuals transition to permanent housing. And although, we had a great transition rate, at some point we were at 39%. And that was our primary focus, to get them to stabilize, to get them into housing. And all of that has shifted dramatically. Somebody was asking me about outcomes this morning, and I said right now, the only data that we're really collecting is how each individual is feeling on a daily basis, emotionally, what their mental health state is, and then physically. We take temperatures of the shelter residents 3 times a day to ensure that they're healthy. Some of the response has been, we were already in crisis management. We had been trained for mental health. We had our food pantry, our medicine cabinets, community relationships with medical services in the community. And we had been trained on infectious disease control, but for TB, tuberculosis. And then the response has been to flex that muscle, I would say. We had the foundation. So we've had to, soon after we started hearing about COVID in LA, and before any Safer at Home order was given, we decided to keep our senior population in-house. Like, we asked them not to leave anymore and to shelter in place. after that, we decided that everybody, and then the safer at home order came out. And then we asked everyone, again, to stay at the shelters so that they would be safer at home. And at that point, we had to transition our shelter from 14 hours to 24 hours, which meant that we had to shift schedules for all of our staff, so that we could at least have 1 or 2 people working at every shift. And we also had to, which has impacted us greatly, we had to cancel our volunteer groups because we couldn't provide safe distancing with our volunteer groups and with the shelter residents. So we had to cancel, and that was our volunteer groups are really what helps sustain us throughout the year, because they provide dinner on a daily basis, 365 days a year. And so that's been huge. So that's one of the reasons we've reached out to community. And then in addition, now that we were open 24 hours, we had to provide lunch. And so that was an extra 500 meals a week, which we didn't have the funding for, and have also asked community support. There's been a lot of logistical changes as well. I have a whole list. It's about 50 logistical changes, and staff have been amazing at adapting to the changes. But again, I think it's because the Guadalupe Homeless Project has worked in crisis in providing supports for folks already in crisis. So this just got elevated. I hope that answers the question.
That's great. Thanks, Raquel. And maybe help us, and maybe this is a question for all of you, because you may each have some stories or thoughts to share. But what are you walk with so many people, and as you know, Raquel, you've been walking with people for many years in their kind of struggles in crisis, right? What are some of the reasons that people come to seek support and companionship, from the project? What are some of the stories? Maybe not, obviously we want to be respectful of individuals and things like that, but what are some of the reasons that people end up coming seeking assistance?
Yeah, I'll start off, and then Cynthia and Father Brendan, please feel free to jump in. I think for the women's shelter, the women are senior age, so a lot of them had informal jobs. They were housekeepers, nannies, and a lot of times those wages do not cover a rent, or they don't get paid enough to have their own place. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is gentrification in our community. Apartments are $1,500, $2,000 a month, $2,500. So they're not affordable for a lot of the residents in our community. So or if apartment buildings are being knocked down to build new ones, and the current tenants are being asked to move out. So we have some of those individuals that, because of gentrification, were now homeless. A lot of other residents from the men's shelter are looking for a better opportunity, literally left their families because they thought that by coming here, they're going to be able to find work, get paid, and then send that money back home. And then others, the drug and gang violence is a real thing that's affecting a lot of the young men in Latin American communities. And those are also real reasons why they're here at the shelter.
Sure. Father Brendan, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add very briefly that the shelter has built a widespread reputation and of being a home for immigrants from all over. So I would say that the shelter, the majority of the residents are immigrants, men and women, from all over the world. We've had immigrants from Russia, from Africa, and certainly from Central America and Mexico, who have heard about Dolores' mission and Proyecto Pastoral from their countries in many ways, or in their migration stories, and have come seeking refuge, not only like shelter, physical shelter, but also emotional shelter and support and spirituality connection.
That's great. Thanks. Father Brennan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Cynthia just said is exactly right, that Raquel can name a million reasons that somebody would end up on the streets and in need of shelter. But not all of those reasons will direct people towards Dolores Mission. But this dynamic of feeling themselves safe in a sanctuary, regardless of immigration status, regardless of some of the other needs that they might have, that's what brings them to Dolores Mission. It's not just that they're pushed by whatever injustice or poverty that they were suffering. It's that they're actually pulled to by a community that says to them, "You're at home here." That this project began as a sanctuary for folks that were not being welcomed in the country or in other places. And I think that's important to remember, that there's also that dynamic of what they find at the shelter is not just food, as important as that is, and not just a place to sleep that's safe, as important as that is. But they often comment about how it does feel more like their home. You know, there's big institutional shelters just across the river with 1,000 beds in each shelter. But at Dolores Mission, there's very much this sense that in the plaza, in the church, that it's an environment that speaks to more of their humanity, perhaps, than just the bare minimum needs that people have.
Sure, sure. Now, through social media and sharing and things like that, we've seen that you're receiving support, a lot of support from the local community, including local restaurants. Can you tell us a little bit more about the ways that the community is supporting the Guadalupe Project?
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most beautiful and inspiring things to witness, is that during a time of crisis, when people are experiencing that anxiety and that stress at home, that they're able to find to give to others. Like, even if jobs were uncertain, even if we don't, like, if individuals and families didn't know what was going to happen the next week with this crisis, they still found it within themselves to come and give us, whether it was a bag of rice, a bag of beans, coffee, vitamin C, whatever was asked for was brought. And I can't say that that just happened out of nowhere. I think for many years, 30 years that the shelter and Dolores Mission have been here, Proyecto have been here, there's been a lot of community building, a lot of reciprocal relationships. And so seeing this, and if I've ever wondered worst case scenario, like, oh, what would happen if we lost funding, let's say. But seeing the community respond the way they have has just been really moving, very inspiring, to see the love that people have for our shelter, for the residents.
Yeah.
And then, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
And then when all of this started, you know, when we realized, okay, we need to provide lunch because now we're open 24 hours and we didn't have the budget for it. And talking with Cynthia, she was like, well, what restaurants do we reach out to? So we, you know, created a list of local restaurants and contacted them, and then created this buy one, give one. That's been incredible because they get this catered meal once a week every time somebody buys 70 plates from them, order 70 meals from them. So once that happens, then they donate 70 meals to the shelter. And let me tell you, it's like some delicious, hearty burritos. And
that sounds delicious. Yeah, that's great.
I'm very pleased.
Yeah. Now, Raquel, you mentioned that this is a moment of crisis. For you work with people in crisis. We're in kind of a moment of public crisis in a lot of ways, and that can be really stressful. How has the staff kind of dealt with maybe the stress of kind of adding another layer of complexity, additional meals, kind of having to protect themselves, to stay healthy themselves? How has everyone dealt with that?
I think before I respond to that part, I think what's really helped us handle or go into the crisis at this level is that we really had a strong foundation of values that have always guided us, providing a place of dignity, a home of dignity for those that are most marginalized, and treating everybody with dignity and respect. I think that's what's carried us through all of this, because there's been some really challenging moments. And so now that we're in all of this, I think what's helped us is that a lot of us have worked together for many years. I have very committed staff that have been here for 15, 20 years. And those of us that have been here less, like I've been here, it'll be 12 years, but we've been working as a team for a very long time. And I think that's been the strength behind us. I mean, you never know who you're going to spend a crisis with. And my colleagues are the ones that I get to go through this crisis with. And so, so one of the ways we've responded is by in talking with Cynthia and the board gave us 2 days off for mental health. I mean, that's amazing. A month, twice a month. We have food here. We sort of eat together, but keeping our social distancing 6 feet apart. We laugh at whatever is funny, and we try to find those moments together. We share what's positive, what's working. And then realizing when somebody needs to take a break, like as the director, and saying, hey, I think it's a good idea. Maybe we need to take a break. Because there has been those moments that people get are working on the edge, and that's not good for any one of us.
Yeah. I noticed behind Father Brendan is Pope Francis is waving at us right now. There he is. Thank you. And I think a lot about Pope Francis. He talks so often about the culture of encounter. And but yet we're in a time of social distancing where we need to keep, we're trying to keep space between each other. What does a culture of encounter look like in the context of our social distanced reality and our need to ensure that that if we're going to care for others, we need to care for ourselves as well?
I'll share this. Father Brendan, a couple of weeks ago, when the stress was a little high, he came and had that moment of encounter, I think, with the shelter residents. He came to do a meditation, and the chairs were set up 6 feet apart, and he had his mask on. The men had their mask on. Very different. The environment here is very different than how it used to be, where it was all about, I mean, anybody that came through the gate was almost greeted with a hug, and now we can't do that. But I was really thankful to Father Brendan that he was able to come and do that for the shelter residents and some of the staff. If you want to add more, Father Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a beautiful moment for me. Like Raquel says, the interaction is not as fluid as it usually would be. The hardest thing, the little detail that I keep fixing on, is that the plaza of the church, the gate is usually just wide open, but we have to keep it locked now because we have to make sure we know who's coming and going. And that just a little symbol there's something wrong there. That's an indicator that we're not right now where we want to be. But I think our spirituality teaches us that's also okay. And that God encounters, like the scripture stories recently in Easter, all about Jesus literally walking through walls and also accompanying people on the way. And I think that's another important thing, is that encounter is not just a static moment where we meet and stay there. That's also an encounter where we might join each other along a journey. And I think the shelter has been that way for a long time. At first, it was a destination point, a sanctuary. But then Raquel and her staff over time developed, well, we don't want people to stay in this church forever. We want them to have a home. So we need to accompany them on a journey to somewhere else. I think we're back in a moment where, okay, now this is also newly a sanctuary, and there's a way of encountering people in that safe space. But in the future, again, the gate will open and we'll continue that encounter that's not just a meeting place, but a journey. I think that image of both coming together in a place, but also moving together in a is what Pope Francis is all about. He doesn't want us just to stay statically where we are. He's all about throw the windows open, move the church into the new century, And so I think that is typical of Encounter in the way that my homeboy, which side is he on, Francis, would approve of. Yeah.
There you go. I like that. And Father Brandon, you mentioned the future. What do you think can be learned about the ways that you've had to adjust, or kind of what you've experienced and what you're continuing to experience? And we recognize that we're, in so many ways, we're just at the beginning of kind of this journey as our global family works to overcome this pandemic. Is there anything that you think can be learned from this through the experience of the Guadalupe Project?
Gosh, I mean, I think absolutely. If this is not a moment for us to be learning something, then we're lost.
Sure.
I was in a call the other day with another organizing group, a community organizing group, and one of the men on that call, he said, we're hearing a lot about essential workers, but he says, I want us to just stop at that first word, essential. And I want us to learn in this moment and return to what is essential. And that, I think, is the opportunity here. What will we learn in this moment about what's essential to people's safety, to people's care, to people's welcome? The shelter, the Guadalupe Project, is a beacon of that kind of light, of what is most human in us, what is most essential to what it means for us to be a community. And so I think going forward, I think Raquel's staff is learning every day new things that they didn't know they needed to know. But in the bigger picture, I think we'll learn even more about the ways in which we were missing the mark about what's essential in our society and in our city and in our country, to say, this is what we need to, essentially, this is what we need to be providing all people. This crisis is revealing so many new ways in which our folks and the folks in the Homeless Project are burdened with things they don't have to be burdened with, and that we should free them from that.
Cynthia or Raquel, do you have anything to add in terms of things that could be learned in the midst of all this?
Yeah, and I don't know that it's a new, I don't know to what extent it's learning, but more, I think, just deep appreciation and recognition. So maybe the learning is like the doubling down, and how can we double down on the relationships with community? Because, as Raquel mentioned initially, what the source of strength and the source, the source for resources, for food, for support, is coming, responsiveness for health, even like our local community health clinic, as opposed to like the big city systems, is what is coming to the rescue, and what is helping us survive and thrive throughout this period. So I would say that doubling down on relationships with community.
And before we finish up, the Jesuits globally have talked about their way of proceeding, rooted in four universal apostolic preferences, and one of them, I think, speaks to a lot of the ministry that happens at the Guadalupe Project, the idea of walking with the excluded. Father Brennan, I just wonder if you could offer any insights on how you see the work at the Guadalupe Project have being part of this global mission, and the ways that I know that Father General, the leader of the Jesuits worldwide, visited the area and had a chance to interact with some folks from social ministry projects in the region. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is, in a million ways, it's obvious how this Guadalupe Homeless Project has, for over 30 years now, been a sign of not just Raquel and her staff, but the whole community walking with the most excluded people in their neighborhood. So that's easy. I mean, we could point to a million examples of that. But the preferences that you're talking about, the universal apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus, are not to be read as if, okay, Proyecto Pastoral does that part of it, and then somebody else will do care for the common home or accompanying youth or showing the way to God, right? There's 3 other preferences for someone else. They're universal in the sense that all of our work needs to take these as universal sort of preferences that we do in everything. So we also need to lift up how the Guadalupe Homeless Project is showing the way to God. It's not just walking with marginalized and isn't that nice. It's actually theologically and spiritually teaching us something about what it means to be close to God. And also journeying with the youth. All of our TK through 8th graders at the school and all of their families over the course of their education at Dolores Mission School are connected with the shelter. They make meals for the shelter. They sit down and they eat across the table from the residents of the shelter. So it's also a project that's about journeying with young people. Although many of the people in the shelter are young, it's a way in which we model that part of the preferences too. And this care for the common home, I was spinning my wheels about that a little bit because it's not ecological necessarily. We're not here to solve climate change. Although the men take care of a cat, a beloved cat in the plaza, and they have a little garden and stuff. But I think that notion of what does it mean to have a common home, I think that's something this shelter witnesses to every day. That our church needs to be a church for all people, and that this project is about how not only in the church, but in the city, in the state, in the country, in the world, if we thought of this as a common home, then these borders that sort of divide us, these policies that exclude us, all of those would be just torn apart. And we would get rid of that broken system and adopt something that's more universal and definitely more something I would prefer more, to use that language of those priorities. But I think that's the trick here, is that it's not just the nice thing we do on the side. It's literally in the pews of the church. We're not just praying here and working out on the plaza. The 2 things have to be happening all times and everywhere, because that's the way this project is a sign of what it means to be close to God.
Thank you for that wonderful analysis of the UAPs. That's really helpful. Raquel, Cynthia, and Father Brendan, it's been wonderful to have you with us today to share the good work happening there at the Guadalupe Project. We're so grateful for your time and wishes for continued health and safety, and thank you for thank you kind of in solidarity. We're in solidarity with you and your work. So thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Chris.
And we're grateful also to those who joined us today for this special broadcast or who will watch online later. We'd also like to invite you to be part of the Ignatian Solidarity Network's efforts to advocate for a more just world. You can join us in calling on Congress to ensure the protection of those most in need amid the COVID-19 crisis, including asking our elected officials for measures to improve economic security of the most vulnerable and address the unique health risks posed to people in our prisons, those who are immigrants and migrants, low-income communities and communities of color, which already bear a significant burden of poor environmental and health conditions. You can take action today by texting COVID, that's COVID, to 202-800-1541. Again, that's COVID to 202-800-1541. You'll be directed to an action alert where you can contact your members of Congress right here and now. Also, if you like the conversation we had today and want to share it or watch it again, this and other videos are available on our YouTube and Facebook pages, so make sure to check back there. And we just want to say thank you again to our guests today from the Guadalupe Homeless Project for being with us, and we look forward to our next edition of Good Works next week. Thanks and have a great day.